If you enjoyed the story and want to see more exciting and dramatic tales, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We have many more twists and turns in store for you. Mia adjusted the towel wrapped tightly around her body as she stepped out of the bathroom. The warm steam lingered in the air, swirling around her in soft clouds as droplets of water trailed down her arms. She paused in front of the mirror, brushing her damp hair away from her face, when she heard the faint creak of the bedroom door opening behind her. Startled, she spun around. Standing in the doorway was Ethan, her boyfriend's best friend. His gaze flickered to hers, but not before lingering on her bare shoulders and the edges of her towel that clung precariously to her form. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what are you doing here? Liam isn't home." "I know," Ethan replied, his voice low and measured. "He told me to drop off his stuff, but I didn't expect you'd be here like this." Her heart thudded in her chest as he stepped further into the room, his footsteps slow and deliberate. She backed up a little, pressing herself against the wall. "You should leave," she said, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "I will," Ethan said, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "But not before I tell you something." His eyes held hers, dark and unreadable. "You must know, Mia, I've always noticed you. The way you laugh, the way you look at people, even the way you fidget when you're nervous. You're captivating." "Ethan, this isn't appropriate," she stammered, clutching the edges of her towel tighter as he took another step closer. "Maybe it's not," he admitted, his voice dropping even lower. "But can you honestly tell me you've never felt it too? Even just for a second?" Mia's breath hitched as his words struck something deep within her, a fleeting thought she'd buried. The moment it had surfaced, she shook her head, trying to dispel the heat rising between them. "This is wrong," she whispered. "Then tell me to leave," Ethan said, his voice soft but insistent. He was close now, his hand brushing lightly against the wall beside her, caging her in without touching her. "Say the words and I'll go." Mia opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Her heart was racing, her senses overwhelmed by the proximity of him, the faint scent of his cologne, the intensity of his gaze, the warmth radiating from his body. She hated the part of her that didn't want to push him away. Ethan's fingers grazed the damp strands of her hair, tucking them gently behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. "You're stunning," he murmured, his lips dangerously close to her ear. "And I can't stop thinking about you." Before she could respond, his hand moved to her shoulder, sliding down the curve of her back. His touch was both hesitant and confident, as though he was testing her reaction. Mia's resolve wavered, her breath hitching, as his fingers trailed lower. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Life rarely is," he replied, his lips hovering near the corner of her mouth. His hand rested on her waist, his touch firm yet gentle, pulling her closer. Mia's mind screamed at her to stop this, to push him away, but her body betrayed her. Leaning into him instead, she closed her eyes, feeling the heat of his breath against her skin as he tilted her chin upward. "I'll leave," Ethan said softly, his lips brushing against her ear. "If that's what you really want." But she didn't answer. In the silence that followed, the distance between them disappeared, their breaths mingling as the storm of unspoken desires finally broke free. Mia didn't move as Ethan's hand lingered on her waist, his fingers gently pressing against the soft material of the towel. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, betraying the whirlwind of emotions spiraling inside her. Every logical thought told her to stop, to push him away, to yell at him for stepping over boundaries. But his closeness, his touch, and the intensity of his gaze sent a heat through her she couldn't ignore. "Tell me to stop," Ethan murmured again, his voice deeper this time, filled with need. She bit her lip, her throat dry as she searched for words that wouldn't come. His fingers moved ever so slightly, tracing small circles against the fabric at her waist. The sensation made her stomach tighten, her body reacting on instinct to the growing tension. "Ethan," she whispered, though it wasn't the warning she'd intended. It sounded more like a plea. He took that as a sign, leaning closer until their noses almost brushed. His other hand rose, his fingers skimming her arm as he tucked a stray lock of damp hair behind her ear. The tenderness of the gesture made her breath hitch. "You're so beautiful, Mia," he whispered, his lips hovering just above hers. "I've tried to ignore it for so long, but being this close to you, I can't." His confession made her heart pound harder. She wanted to respond, to say something, but her mind was a blur. All she could focus on was the way his hand moved to the small of her back, pulling her closer as his lips finally claimed hers. The kiss was soft at first, almost testing, but when she didn't pull away, it deepened. His lips were warm and insistent, coaxing her into a rhythm that quickly became intoxicating. Mia felt herself melting into him, her hands unconsciously gripping his shirt as her body pressed against his. The towel slipped slightly as she moved, but she didn't care. All that mattered was the way his hands now roamed her back, tracing every curve and sending shivers of pleasure down her spine. Ethan's lips left hers only to trail down her jawline, planting soft, lingering kisses along the curve of her neck. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice a mix of desire and hesitation. He paused, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "Say the word, Mia, and I'll stop. But if this is what you want to, then I can't hold back anymore." Her heart was in turmoil. She knew this was wrong, that it would shatter everything if Liam ever found out. But the way Ethan looked at her, the way he touched her, it awakened something she hadn't felt in a long time. A part of her, buried under routine and expectations, longed to feel wanted, desired, and alive. As she started, her voice trembling. But instead of finishing her sentence, she leaned forward, capturing his lips in a kiss that said everything she couldn't put into words. Ethan groaned softly against her mouth, his grip on her tightening as he pressed her against the wall. The towel slipped further, and she felt the cool air against her skin. But it only heightened the sensations coursing through her. His hands explored her back, his touch firm yet gentle, as though he couldn't get enough of her. Mia's mind drifted in and out of clarity, her body reacting to every movement, every touch. She felt his fingers trail up her spine before they moved lower, gripping her hips and pulling her flesh against him. The heat between them was unbearable now, and she couldn't stop herself from arching into him, craving more. As their kisses grew more passionate, Ethan lifted her slightly, guiding her toward the edge of the bed. She gasped softly as he lowered her onto the mattress, his body hovering over hers. The towel fell away completely, but Ethan didn't look at her with anything but admiration and desire. "You're perfect," he whispered, his lips brushing against her collarbone as his hands caressed her sides. Mia closed her eyes, her hands tangling in his hair as she let herself get lost in the moment. Every kiss, every touch, sent waves of pleasure through her, making her forget the world outside the room. Time seemed to stand still as they explored each other, the boundaries of their connection dissolving with every passing second. Ethan's touch was both tender and demanding, as though he was savoring every inch of her while also claiming her as his own. When their eyes met again, there was an unspoken understanding between them. This moment, though forbidden, was something they both needed. It was a release, a breaking of chains they hadn't even realized were binding them. As the night wore on, they stayed close, their breaths mingling as they lay entwined. Ethan's fingers traced patterns along her skin, his touch soothing yet still igniting sparks wherever it landed. "I don't want this to end," he murmured against her hair. Mia swallowed hard, her emotions a tangled mess. She knew the reality waiting for them outside this room, the consequences of what they'd just done. But in Ethan's arms, she felt safe, cherished, and desired in a way she hadn't in years. "It can't happen again," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tightened his hold on her, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Let's not think about tomorrow right now," he said. "Let's just stay here like this a little longer." Mia closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink into the warmth of his embrace. Deep down, she knew this moment was fleeting, but for now, she chose to hold on to it, savoring the forbidden passion that had brought them together. As dawn began to break, the golden light streaming through the window illuminated their tangled forms. Mia stirred, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. Ethan watched her silently, his expression unreadable. "We need to figure this out," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We will," he promised, though the uncertainty in his eyes mirrored her own. The future was uncertain and the lines they'd crossed couldn't be undone. But for now, they had this moment, and it was enough. The sun crept higher into the sky, casting soft rays of golden light into the room. Ethan and Mia lay side by side, their breath slow and even. The reality of what they had done lingered in the air like an unspoken truth, but neither of them dared to address it just yet. Ethan turned onto his side, propping his head on his hand as he looked at her. Mia was staring at the ceiling, her damp hair fanned out across the pillow, her lips still slightly swollen from their kisses. There was a softness to her now, a vulnerability he had never seen before. It made his chest tighten. "You're quiet," he said gently, brushing his fingers along her arm. Mia shifted her gaze to him, her eyes searching his. "I'm trying to figure out how we got here," she admitted. Ethan smiled faintly, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Does it matter? We're here now." Her lips parted as though she wanted to argue, but the warmth in his touch silenced her. She leaned into his palm, closing her eyes for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Liam's your best friend. How can I face him after this?" Ethan's expression darkened slightly. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I know," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "But Mia, I can't pretend that what I feel for you isn't real." Mia sat up too, clutching the sheet to her chest. Her heart ached at his words, torn between the pull of her feelings for Ethan and the guilt of betraying. "Liam, this isn't fair to anyone," she said. "Not to Liam, not to you, and not to me." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm but tender. It's not fair, but life rarely is. I don't want to hurt Liam, but I can't ignore this. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Mia, I don't think I can just walk away from you now. Her breath caught at the intensity in his voice. She searched his eyes, hoping to find doubt or hesitation, but there was none. Instead, she saw something that scared her even more. Love. Ethan, she began, but he silenced her with a soft kiss. Don't, he whispered against her lips. Don't push me away. Let me show you how much you mean to me. Mia wanted to resist, to pull back and tell him this was impossible. But the way he kissed her, the way his hands cradled her face as though she was something precious, made her resolve crumble. She kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his hair as she poured all her confusion, fear and longing into him. Their embrace deepened, the tension between them dissolving into something softer, more tender. Ethan's touch was different this time, not fueled by the heat of the moment but by something deeper, more meaningful. He took his time, tracing every curve of her body as though committing her to memory. When they finally parted, they lay together in silence, their limbs entwined. Mia rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was a sound that comforted her, even as her mind raced with unanswered questions. What happens now? She asked softly, her voice muffled against his skin. Ethan stroked her hair, his fingers gentle and soothing. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I can't go back to pretending I don't care about you. Mia sighed, her fingers tracing small circles on his chest. Liam deserves to know the truth, she said, though the thought made her stomach churn. I know, Ethan said, his voice heavy. But let me be the one to tell him. He deserves to hear it from me. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with worrying. What if he never forgives you? Ethan cupped her face, his gaze unwavering. Then I'll deal with that. But I won't regret this, Mia, I won't regret you. His words brought tears to her eyes. She kissed him again, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of gratitude and love. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Ethan kept his promise, confronting Liam and confessing everything. The fallout was as painful as Mia had feared. Liam's anger was explosive, his sense of betrayal cutting deep. You were my best friend, Liam had shouted, his voice shaking with fury. How could you do this to me, to us? Ethan had taken the brunt of Liam's wrath, standing firm even as his former friend unleashed a torrent of emotions. I'm sorry, he had said, his voice steady. I never meant to hurt you, but I can't lie to you either. I love her, Liam. I've loved her for a long time. Liam had stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed in Mia's chest, leaving her breathless. She had cried that night, her heart breaking for the pain they had caused. But through it all, Ethan had been there. He held her when she cried, whispered reassurances when she doubted, and reminded her that their love was worth fighting for. Weeks turned into months, and the tension slowly began to fade. Liam stopped answering Ethan's calls, but Mia knew it was for the best. The wounds they had inflicted on him would take time to heal, and she couldn't blame him for wanting distance. Ethan and Mia's relationship, though born of chaos, grew stronger with each passing day. They learned to navigate their new reality together, building a bond that was unshakable. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Ethan's apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan took her hand in his. Mia, he began, his voice soft but filled with determination. I know this hasn't been easy. And I know we've hurt people along the way. But I love you. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Mia's heart swelled at his words. She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with emotion. I love you too, she said, her voice trembling. Ethan smiled, pulling her into his arms. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they kissed, their love shining brighter than the fading light. Their journey had been messy and complicated, but it had brought them to a place of undeniable love. Together, they faced the future with hope, knowing that even in the midst of chaos, they had found something worth holding on to.